So the title of this session is Migration, Where to Now? Where to now? But where are we now? Oh. No. Yeah. Where are we now? So we all explained, we all went through our histories of migration in a way, and I also want to reassure you, you're not alone. There are 244 million migrants across the globe for the year 2015. These are data collected by the IOM. A large part of them are what we would call today labor migrants, migrants that move across to work. And there are, of course, migrants that are not migrants, but they are asylum seekers and refugees. And I would like you to focus on this group right now for a second, whereas much of the debates that we're currently having in the European Parliament mostly, if not only, talk about the issue of asylum for very clear reasons. That's what's called the so-called asylum crisis. However, let's not forget the 4.5 million and probably more Syrian refugees are hosted by only 5 countries, the main of which being Turkey. There are 2.5 million Syrian refugees officially registered in Turkey, which means that probably many more Syrian refugees are in Turkey. And also, let's not forget that these are only numbers that take into account Syrian refugees. In the European Parliament debate, I see often forgetting the fact that the concept of refugee is not limited to Syrian nationals. And these days we have this tendency of only talking about the Syrian issue, whereas many other nationalities, including the Afghans, who are currently the second most numerous nationality coming irregularly at the borders of Europe and not getting access through a legal path, are arriving today in Europe. In 2015, there have been above 1 million first-time asylum seekers in the EU. This is a plus 123% from last year, and therefore an unprecedented number. And this is why, I guess, in the European Parliament, we are so very much focused on this issue. I will skip through the other figures to jump to the last one, where you see that there are still, though, an estimated number, and sorry if the estimate is so broad, but obviously estimating the number of undocumented migrants in Europe is not easy. First reason being that they are not registered and they are undocumented. But there is a study dating back from 2009 that states that there could be in between 1.5 million to 3.8 million undocumented migrants in the EU. What is the most interesting part about this study, which is called Clandestino, is not the actual figure, which has probably changed until now. What is interesting and remains true, and is also highlighted in the Frontex annual risk analysis of 2016, published earlier this year, is that most irregular migrants, undocumented migrants, do not enter Europe irregularly. It's not a crisis at the border. Most undocumented migrants become irregularly as a consequence of losing their status. Why? Because maybe they arrived through family reunification and they left an abusive wife or husband. Or maybe because they were students and they couldn't find a job and the visa expired and then they stayed. Or maybe, and this happened quite a lot in Southern Europe recently, they had a visa, they were working, but they lost their job and therefore they lost their visa and kept on working irregularly because the market is paying them. But let's get to perceptions. And this has been touched upon by all speakers before me, so I won't stand here much longer. But I want you to think about how language actually shapes reality. We live in a European Union legislative dimension that very often puts together criminal law and migration. We have something called facilitators package, which is made of a facilitations directive that criminalize facilitating irregular entry or irregular stay in Europe. This impacts on the use of penal law, criminal law, to address the issue of migration, and has a terrible impact right now in criminalizing those providing humanitarian assistance to those trying to enter or to stay in the territory irregularly. This is a Bansky image, for those of you not familiar with it. Was, by the way, I think, taken out of the wall where it used to be. But let's come to the policy response. And I want to try and illustrate why the policy response that we're having so far is not only fragmented, but also highly inadequate. You all remember, you all saw the picture of Aylan Kurdi on the shores. But I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the picture of Adu. Can you raise your hand if you are? Adu is an 8-year-old boy, originally from the Ivory Coast, and is equally a symbol of the shame, of the shameful EU policy on migration. Why? Adu's father lives in the Canary Islands regularly. He has a job, and he is working. He applies for family reunification for his son to join him in the Canary Islands. However, the permission gets denied. Why? Because the father is falling short of 43 euros in the application to show that he can maintain his son. What happens? That the son really wants to go. Therefore, they hire a smuggler. The smuggler is a woman from Morocco who's very young. She's 18, and she agrees to take him to Ceuta, air border. Obviously, air border, we have X-ray scans. And this is what they see in the X-ray scan. And what do? First thing they do is they arrest the woman as a smuggler. Obviously, she's not a professional smuggler, as you can see. And Adu is taken into care in Ceuta. Long story short, they find out who the father is, they find out who the mother is, they arrest the father. And after actions taken by NGOs and lots of legal work, Adu is now in the Canary Islands with his father. But what is the human cost? What did it take? And it was only because he fell short of 43 euro. I've taken the, I've been trying to do an exercise recently in analyzing the most recent communications or proposals or state of play reports adopted by the European Commission. And I started this only last year with what is called the European Agenda on Migration. I didn't go back because it's overwhelming, it's a lot of work. But the objective of this exercise I'm trying to do is to try and see how the language in the Commission communications is becoming more and more hostile. And this is a phenomenon that has started already almost 2 decades ago. And we now see how, for example, so this is meant to be the title of, more or less, the title of the Commission proposal or report. And below I write a short remark about, in this case, the use of detention. I have similar round schemes for other issues. In this case, I chose detention because, as you can see, maybe you cannot see, but basically what the European Commission has been doing since May 2015 is trying and reiterate to member states how and why they should make use of detention when apprehending irregular migrants at the borders and for accommodating, as they say, asylum seekers. So from a situation where with the Returns Directive, detention was the absolute exception, we are coming to a situation where the European Commission is asking member states to make use of detention on a systematic basis. And this is very clear in the words, for example, on the 14th of October 2016, in the state of play of the implementation of relocations. The Commission is saying, well, yeah, Greece is doing okay, there are still many things they can do, and among them, they have to increase their detention capacity. This is in the report to Greece. But in the report to Italy, as Italy had initially decreased the number of their detention capacity nationally, what the European Commission has done is criticizing Italy for their decision and calling the country to increase once again the number of detention capacities. There is an understanding now that hotspots have now become places of closed detention. So there's no longer the need to call it reception or use euphemism, but rather they're really saying that in hotspots, the priority should be given to return. So we're ending up to a policy that really all it tries to do is to address influxes at the border and distinguish between those who are beneficiaries of international protection, who will anyway go into detention until their application for asylum is sorted, and those who do not qualify for international protection because they don't come from countries that are listed. And again, we go back to the idea that only Syrians are beneficiaries of international protection alongside other few countries. And then the priority becomes return. But however, there are good things. There are citizen movements, and these have been mentioned already, that show that largely public opinion and the public is willing to do something to help refugees and migrants rather than being against these movements. There is a very interesting letter that was sent by a number of organizations that is called We Apologize and We Are Ashamed. It's two different initiatives on the same lines. And they are writing to the European Commission after they adopt the Action Plan on Migration, where they say how ashamed they are, basically. They don't recognize themselves, and they apologize. There is also a very interesting exercise that has been done by an organization. Oh, sorry, it started. Well, you look at it first. No. So this is an initiative of IOM, but it's interesting because it was initially started by a smaller NGO called the Migrant Voice in the UK. They put posters all over the tube in London with different faces of people saying, I'm a migrant, more or less what we did earlier today. And the IOM now, with more funding and more resources, have done this with videos, etc. And here they try to show why a positive message about migration.
Anna Mohajira, ich bin Migrantin, das gehört ja aus verschiedenen Ländern. Sie kommt aus Schweden, oder?
Sie kommt aus Brasilien. Eu sou migrante.
Eu sou migrante. Eu sou migrante.
And there is Refugees Welcome, an initiative that you're all probably familiar with by now. It was mentioned before. I think what's interesting about this is the way it is really showing. They're trying to show how easy it can be to host a migrant in your community. So they have a very nice website, very modern. When they say, how does it work? You get on your laptop, we'll put you in touch, and then it's very easy. We will refer you to the migrant, to the refugee family who will come to you. But there's another very interesting initiative that I want to tell you about. The person you see here is Taleb. And here I've tried to show you how far we are from the communal municipality that I'm going to tell you about. The municipality is called Capriglio. It's it's a village of 281 inhabitants, the one being Taleb. It will take you about 21 hours by car to get there from here. And what happened is that Taleb he was 27 when we arrived in Italy, and more precisely in this very tiny place. To work is from Bangladesh. And he was very much welcomed into the community. He became friends with everyone, he was working, he was bringing a positive contribution to the community. However, he applied for asylum, his application was denied. And he was issued with removal directions to leave Italy in a certain period of days. The mayor of Capriglio decided to call on other citizens and NGOs to write a letter to the court in Torino, which was the place where the decision was issued, to protest against his deportation. And I think it's very interesting how a group of 281 people, which is very little number, managed actually to keep Taleb in the community. They were outraged. Of course, among them there was the local priest, there was the mayor. So we're not just talking about 280 people coming together. But it was an excellent exercise of a local community coming together against a decision of the state. And this is very evident in most of local and regional authorities' responses to a national policy. I want to take another example before you read Where to Now. Another example is what Spain has been doing with the so-called Real Decreto that modified the access to healthcare law in Spain a couple of years ago. They used to have a system of healthcare that would allow access to healthcare to all people, basically. It was almost universal access to healthcare, and one of the few examples we had in Europe at the time. With this Real Decreto in 2014, when it was implemented, no one, basically, no migrant could have access to healthcare. There was no emergency healthcare. And this resulted in almost all communities, autonomous regions of Spain, excluding one, to not apply the Real Decreto as such. They all found ways around it. And the only region that did not apply the Real Decreto as it was, so it was denying access to healthcare to migrants, was the region that is neighboring the community of Madrid. And they were saying, well, we don't have migrants here, they don't come to our hospitals. And actually the reality is that they were just taking their car and they were going to the community of Madrid where they would have access to healthcare in a way or the other. This law also resulted in the death of Alpha Pam, if you remember, a few years back, of tuberculosis. So there are these hostile policies that are being adopted. And if I had to suggest a way forward, I would like it to be a very broad way forward that should take into account different issues and also the fact that all of us and all of the migrants have a different story. Therefore, they all need different solutions for their own individual story. So there are refugees, but there are not only refugees. There are migrants who want to come to work. There are people who want to come to join their families here, or there are people who want to study, etc. So that's why a future policy should open up regular channels, as number 2 here. When I say regular channels, I don't just mean access to Europe through resettlement for refugees. And there, I really would like you to, if probably you have already, but the idea that that came from members of the European Parliament, the Green members of the European Parliament about relocation, fair sharing, was based on a very important point, which is taking into account the preferences of the asylum seekers when they come to Europe and when we have to allow for a system of relocation to work. What the European Commission is proposing now in the most recent proposal for reforming Dublin does provide for a system of relocation that is mandatory, but however does not mention anywhere that the preferences of the refugees will be taken into account, not at all. So this is absolutely not what we had in mind, and it's again not going to work. The other regular channels that we have to open are linked to point 7 here, and it is to embrace labor migration and face that we are a society that is very much based on migrant workers. And we need them to be here, but we also want to allow them to be here and be able to use the social structure that would protect their labor rights. This is currently not the case. In most countries in Europe, when undocumented migrants work, in Ireland until recently, if I remember correctly, it was even not formally recognized as work if there was an undocumented migrant worker. You had recently a court case that stated that even in the absence of a contract, a migrant worker's work can be considered as such, and therefore labor laws apply. But it wasn't the case earlier, and it is still a big problem across Europe. We should stop obsessing about numbers. Every time we are in the parliament and a debate starts, everyone feels obliged to remark the numbers, and Frontex earlier this year stating in their risk analysis that there have been 1,800,000 and more irregular crossings at the external borders in Europe. Yes, it's an unprecedented number, it's very high, yet what they didn't say very openly is that it is double counting people that are regularly entering the border with Greece and people that are moving on and entering the border with well, the eastern, moving alongside the eastern route, so different borders there. So there is double counting, and we're not.
Sorry, Marie, just to clarify that, so they go into the border at Greece, that's number one.
Yeah.
Are you saying they go beyond, and that's number
Yeah,
two?
because they would have to exit the European Union and then enter again the
So
European
the same
Union.
person is also number two, number three,
Exactly.
number four.
So there is
Okay.
double counting there, and or the same person might have been sent back and come back to Europe irregularly. This would be another double counting.
That's number four.
And that would be number four. So we don't really know, and that's the reality, how accurate these figures can be. All they record is the number of crossings at the border, irrespective of the individual who is crossing the border. And this point has to be made to have evidence-based policies. Again, we do not have to criminalize those that are offering humanitarian assistance. This is the case in EU-promoted, EU-applied legislation right now, but there will be a review of the facilitation package as part of the anti-smuggling plan of the European Commission. This will come later in autumn this year, but we should make sure that this will be one of our demands, that humanitarian assistance and support are not criminalized, irrespective of whether this comes at the moment of facilitating stay or facilitating entry. And we've seen cases of NGO activists in Lesbos being arrested simply because they were dragging people out of the water. Support local authorities, as I said before. Ensure the best interests of the child. In this respect, this seems to be a very popular issue. Right now, everyone is talking about a rising number of unaccompanied children entering the borders of the EU, how to face a situation where the European Union cannot keep track of children that are here, cannot ensure them access to support services. And what is the solution that they're proposing? We have a new proposal to reform Eurodac, which is a system of registering all asylum seekers through fingerprinting. And they are suggesting that one of the solutions will be to lower the age for fingerprinting children. Right now it's 14 years old, and in the proposals of the European Commission, we go down to 6-year-old fingerprinting of all children, because this will help us keep track of children. And I think that we need to challenge these fake assumptions, the fact that the fingerprinting is the golden solution to our problems. Why no one talks about where these children want to go and why they're coming? Maybe they have families to join. And why don't we support our family reunification system instead, first? Providing access to services and support is also linked to this point. When migrants and asylum seekers don't have access to services, they would always try to engage in what the European Commission calls secondary movements and criminalized as such in the new proposals on asylum. But also, it would mean less work for the governments themselves if they were to grant access, for example, to healthcare to all, instead of only granting access to emergency healthcare, which means that a person who's seriously ill can only go to emergency healthcare, while, for example, other illnesses that are on the rise cannot be tracked before. And this was the case. This is what caused the death of Alpha Pam in Spain. He had tuberculosis. He could not access hospital before because it was not being detected, and then eventually he was in emergencies when he died, but it was too late. Ensuring access to justice is also a clear must. And there is a very interesting report that was just published by ECRI in the Council of Europe, which talks about a principle that is called the Firewall Principle. The Firewall Principle basically means that the migration situation should never take precedence before access to justice or access to services. An example of something that happened in Belgium to a Brazilian woman. She was victim of domestic violence by an abusive spouse. She called the police to report the crime. And the police came to her house where she was staying with her spouse. And when they arrived, they realized they were both undocumented. So as a result, the police arrested both the woman who called the police as a victim of abuse and the husband. They took them to the same police station, and they detained them in the same cell. After that, as they were both undocumented and both from the same city in Brazil, they were deported on the same flight to the same city. And we lost track of this woman whose name is Maria, and this dates back to a couple of years ago, this example, and but it is still happening, and it really shows what the backlashes of the current system that we have in place could be, and how important it is to make sure that a victim is regarded as a victim first, and not as a migrant first. As a child should be a child first, and not a migrant first. And finally, we should face the facts, and I think we here all did. We're all migrants, and wish to thank you for your attention.